All right, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Illinois Green Party series. I'm your host, David Rich. We have three recurring guests and one new guest. We're very excited about this. We have from the Deep Green Resistance, Lear Keith, Derek Jensen, and Max Wilbert. How are you? Welcome back.
Good to see you,
Thanks
David.
for having us on.
All right, cool. Let me get this up here. And we have the new gentleman here with us, Will Falk. Will Falk, how are you, sir? Am I saying that right? I feel like I'm
You are.
swearing.
You are.
Okay, cool. Let me put the name up there. Okay, cool. All right, well, let's get started because we have a lot to talk about. As Derek brought up before the show, that it would be timely to talk about politics, and we can segue into because Will is a lawyer. We want to talk a bit about legal law, environmentalism within the law, within the legal system. Um, which I think is a very, very interesting thing to talk about, a very important thing to talk about as well. And it being the night before the election, it's very timely. So, if we why don't we start off? We'll just give you the mic for first of all to talk about like your kind of like your sense of politics. You know what you think about the political system, as far as the environment goes and stuff like that.
You want me to start? Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Unless you don't want to.
I'll start. What what do I think about the political system? I guess I'll start with just my experience trying to use law to protect as much of the natural world as I can. I started out as not in environmental law. I started out as a public defender in Kenosha, Wisconsin, of all places.
Been there.
And I found that work to be incredibly difficult and incredibly ineffective at making any sort of institutional change. The criminal justice system is as racist as everybody says it is. And it's really hard to make any change in law on a sort of case by case, client by client basis in that way. So I burned out in a spectacular fashion and realized while kind of healing from that burnout that the natural world gives me life and the natural world saved my life after that. So I wanted to do everything I could with my law license to protect the natural world.
Yeah.
So that led me into a couple things. One of the maybe most interesting things I've been involved in is the rights of nature movement. In 2017, I helped to file the first ever federal lawsuit seeking rights for a major ecosystem. That was the Colorado River. So we filed a lawsuit trying to get a federal court to declare that the Colorado River is a person and should have the same rights as corporations and other individuals within the American legal system. That lawsuit failed. We were quickly threatened with sanctions for having the audacity to suggest that a river should have the same rights as a corporation. From there, I got involved with what's called the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. So in Toledo, Ohio, I believe it was the summer of 2015. For 3 days in August, an algal bloom in Lake Erie got so bad that they had to shut off the city of Toledo's water. So 500,000 people in northern Ohio were without water for 3 days. And people there in Toledo started to think, what can we do to make this better? So they came up with the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, which would have granted Lake Erie the same personhood rights that corporations have, that you and I have as American citizens. It would have stripped corporations within the municipality of Toledo from many of their constitutional rights. And I think what was really interesting about how they did that was they actually used the local city lawmaking function to introduce the Lake Erie Bill of Rights and actually have the citizens of Toledo vote by referendum to enact the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. And a full 60% of the people in the city of Toledo decided that they did want Lake Erie to have rights. If you're familiar with electoral politics, 60% is a massive majority. That's not something that very often happens. within a few hours of that law, because they did in fact vote for it, the city of Toledo had to put that law on the books and put the Lake Erie Bill of Rights on the books. Within 4 or 5 hours of that law taking effect, a big agricultural corporation sued the city of Toledo, saying that the Lake Erie Bill of Rights is unconstitutional. And of course, a year later, a federal court said that is correct. That nature is never intended to have rights under the American system, and that the Lake Erie Bill of Rights was completely unconstitutional, and the people of Toledo should have known that, and the city of Toledo should have never enacted that law. I think that is a really interesting thing for us, tonight of all nights, because so many Americans believe that we can make change through democratic processes. And when we look at the case of the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, where all the people, 60% of the people in Toledo use their direct lawmaking function, used direct democracy to vote on the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. They actually did not have the democratic right to enact that law in the United States. So that law was struck down. Most recently, I've been involved in a campaign to stop a massive open pit lithium mine in northern Nevada. It's the Thacker Pass lithium mine. We actually, Max and I, on January 15th, 2021, set up camp within the exact place where the open pit would be in Thacker Pass. And originally, I didn't plan on needing to practice law for this campaign. We thought it would be more of a direct action style, public awareness kind of campaign. But we soon realized that there were some traditional legal routes that we could take, and that meant that I began representing the Reno Sparks Indian Colony in a lawsuit against the Bureau of Land Management for permitting the Thacker Pass mine. And the primary law that we're using in that case is the National Historic Preservation Act, which requires federal agencies to engage in certain kinds of consultation with tribes if they're going to destroy sacred places. And Thacker Pass is very sacred to Paiute people and Western Shoshone and probably more regional indigenous groups. So I guess, I can kind of let you decide what you think is most interesting. The rights of nature stuff is certainly more radical in the sense that it is aimed at trying to create true institutional change, try to create deeper changes in the law so that nature isn't only defined as property in American law. Or we can talk about the Thacker Pass stuff where we are trying to use a traditional legal route to hold the mine off for as long as possible and use the legal system to really show people, what happens when these corporations want mines, and how the federal government will bend over backwards to make sure that those mines happen.
Right. I would love to discuss both those things, but first let's talk about the rights of nature. I mean, I don't know the legal process as well as you do, but I know it pretty well. And I can't even see how under this current system, how any court would allow, higher court would allow rights, allocate rights to nature. They would have to define nature as having some sort of cognition or intellect or the ability to choose. And I don't see them doing that. Now, I tend towards a much more, my spiritual dispositions tend towards, spirits involved in everything in nature. I remember Lier in one of the books brought up, we need to get back to animism, which I wholly agree with. I mean, I'll talk to trees all day. And so I see spirits in everything and intelligence, and absolutely. But I can't imagine our legal system agreeing with that. Why not the route of protect nature for our own rights?
Well, I think that for precisely what you were just saying. So, a lot of times people think, it's really weird. Like, why would we give nature rights?
Right.
But it's actually, if you take a look at human history, it's actually really weird not to consider nature as sacred. not to consider or enforce the rights of nature as a way of speaking. So if human beings have been humans for 300,000 years, it's only been the last 290,000 years that some human cultures have developed where they did not consider nature sacred, and where these cultures decided that they could exploit the land for the sole benefit of some human communities. So I see something like the rights of nature as actually getting us back to more traditional human governance systems, and actually returning us to a governance structure that allowed us to live more or less in balance with our land bases for most of human history. But you're absolutely right. I don't think that that the American legal system is ever going to change to actually respect rights of nature. And I think a really interesting question is why. And in a nutshell, the capitalism depends upon the exploitation of nature. If you gave nature rights and you put certain boundaries on the exploitation of nature, then the whole global economy would be impossible. And American politicians are not stupid. They know that. American judges are not stupid. They know that. And they're never going to voluntarily steer the American legal system in a direction where the rights of nature would be honored in that way.
Right.
So yeah, I think it would be something that would help us get back to the way that humans have always lived. But there's a lot in the way that would make that really difficult to happen.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think besides capitalism, I mean, you have the risk of offending somebody. The Bible-based religions as an underpinning of our Constitution, and you know the Bible-based religion in their own theology, like rip nature of its animism, and it's a totally different theological system. So, as far as I can tell, that those need to go too. All right, Max. Where are you at with the whole political thing? Do you vote? I'm not going to ask you who you vote for or anything like that. I mean, I know plenty of people on our side of things, if you will, that just don't even bother. They're like, screw it. It's a waste of time. But I mean, if you don't mind me asking, it's the day before the election.
I do vote mostly because it's really easy. I live in Oregon, and there's mail-in voting here, and so
Beautiful.
you can vote in advance, and you don't have to go wait in a line somewhere.
Mhm.
You know, if I lived in a real swing state, then maybe it would be worth spending 4 hours standing in some line. I mean, some of the stories are pretty horrible. I don't really. I think our political system is incredibly dysfunctional, or you could look at it as incredibly functional for the function that it actually serves, which is to uphold the status quo, the system of power as it currently exists, the ruling class as it's built right now. It's working quite well for that.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I do vote. I don't put a lot of stock into it. It
Right.
takes me about 5 minutes. So, sure. But I think it's just important for people to recognize how much things have changed in this country. You know, the Wilderness Act of 1964, for example, was a firmly bipartisan project. I mean, the Wilderness Act, I think the Senate vote was 73-12, and the House vote was 374-1 in favor of the Wilderness Act. And the one person who voted against it did so because they thought it wasn't strong enough in terms of protecting the natural world. If you tried to pass the Wilderness Act today, it would be a landslide. It would get slaughtered. And that, I think, is just indicative of what we've seen in terms of sort of the degeneration of a functional body politic in this country. You know, the degeneration of community, of a communal orientation, of civic participation, civic education. And it's pretty grim, honestly. It's pretty grim. I think a lot of people in different countries around the world that do have more functional political systems just look at what's happening in this country and just cringe. And that's very sad. I mean, that's been a gradual process. It's been pretty fast in my lifetime, but I'm relatively young. Derek and Lier, I'm sure you've been watching it play out, over a longer time period. And so, yeah, I don't have much faith in the political system at all. I think we live in such a polarized country. But I mean, again, if you're looking at ecological politics, for example, it's polarized between people who want to kill the planet really fast and people who want to kill it a little more slowly.
Right.
For the most part, I mean, that's the positions of the two major political parties. Although there's certainly an argument to be made that both of them want to kill it fast, just in different ways. But yeah, I don't put too much into it. I think there's often really important local fights going on, and I pay attention to some of the different ballot initiatives and different things that are going on at that level. But I mean, we're the most heavily propagandized society that's ever existed.
It's pretty bad.
The amount of manipulation, the amount of money that gets poured into these elections from different special interest groups, it's far from a truly functional and healthy system that we live in. So that's not the most optimistic take, but with the four of us, yes, you're probably not going to get a lot of nice stuff said about electoral politics. All of us have pretty much decided to work outside that realm.
Right.
Whenever there's like in this election, there's a position that's open that nobody ran for it in the water and soil conservation district. And I wrote in my friend, and I got all of our friends to write him in too, because maybe if he gets into that position, then he can stop them from doing some of the post-fire logging stuff they're doing in that particular watershed, and they're trying to do. It's where one of those big fires was this summer, the Cedar Creek fire. So maybe he can get in there and do some good. And but it's pretty grim across the board.
It is very grim, and it's there's all sorts of futility involved. I mean, when you get into a specific office or political position by winning an election, you're already bound by all the things, all the rules and regulations that have come before you. Attempts at changing them are very long. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of effort. Politics is very slow going. And sometimes that's good, but most of the times that's bad. I mean, especially when you're in a situation as urgent as this one, you need things to go more quickly. But like I know a friend of mine is the commissioner in an area by where I live, and she's a huge environmentalist, and she wanted to get in there and make changes. She said, "I can't do anything." She's like, "There's nothing I can do. All I can do is kind of like finesse the budget a little bit." She's like, "But like if roads need to be repaired, I got to order new asphalt. Period. There's nothing I can't do anything other thing."
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. She told me that asphalt is actually recycled, but you still have to add a ton of petroleum to get it up to par or whatever. So it doesn't even matter that it's recycled. Like everybody's like, "Oh, it's recycled, so it's okay." No, it's not okay. Okay. Well, thanks for that. Lier, what do you, any thoughts on America's ridiculousness?
At this point, I pretty much despise both sides, the Democrats and the Republicans, for totally different reasons. But this was the hardest election I've ever voted in. Honestly, I felt just ripped in half by the entire experience. So I wish I could be like Max and just 5 seconds, who cares? But I just couldn't. And I struggled really, really hard because, like I said, there's something to hate on both sides, and they're both things that matter really profoundly to me. So I had a terrible time voting. And I always vote because every time there's an opportunity to vote, my whole life, as long as I've been old enough, all I can think about is the fact that people died to get us universal suffrage. I cannot
Oh,
walk
yeah.
away from the fact that people literally died.
Really died.
Some of them were tortured to death to get universal suffrage in this country, and I
That's
cannot
true.
walk away from that. We have a responsibility, and I don't care if it's just a tiny, tiny little bit of power. We have to do it. And then the other 363 days of the year, we've got to keep fighting to make this system better.
Right.
Which is huge because our constitution basically sucks. So, and the country's way too big. So this is
There's that.
such an uphill battle to even think about this one. I have no hope for any of this, honestly, but
I don't
you have
either.
to get up every morning and feel like, okay, we're going to do it one more time. We're going to go at it. It's not like I'm going to give up, but
Right.
I don't really see any light at the end of the tunnel here. But
No, I don't
anyway,
think that.
it had to be done. And so I have voted yes. And
Great.
I think about Christabel Pankhurst, and I think about Alice Paul, and I think about the women being force fed, and I think about civil rights workers, Freedom Summer getting murdered.
Yep.
And I have to vote. I can't not do it. And I really hope the rest of you keep that in mind when you make your decision about not doing it. We need to do it. People died so that we could have it. So we need to do it.
Well said. I concur. Mr. Jensen.
I have a few things to say, of course. One of them is, I think one of the reasons that environmentalism has gone to hell over the last 60 years, and one of the reasons that the Wilderness Act could have been passed so strongly back then and would not stand a chance now, is peak everything. And I think at that point,
You want to explain what that means?
well, by peak everything, I mean that's peak oil, peak nickel, peak copper, peak, and as much as I love the Wilderness Acts, and I am strongly supportive of them, and I am not complaining about the Wilderness Acts at all, it's also true that for the most part, they have been used to protect rocks and ice. They've been used to protect places that those in power, the capitalists, didn't really want the resources anywhere. They were more difficult to get at. And as this culture has consumed more and more of the planet, they want more and more of, there's no longer that luxury of letting any wildlife escape. And I want to be absolutely clear that I'm putting scare quotes on luxury, because it's not a luxury. Right. So that's one thing I want to say. Another thing I want to say about the political process in general is we hear all the time about how, and I'm not picking on you, Max, because I mean, I profoundly respect you and agree with everything we ever talk about. And it's true that politics are highly polarized today, but it's not a new thing. Sumner, I believe his name was. What was his first name, Will? The senator who was Charles Sumner, who was beaten senseless on the floor of the Senate. There was, I don't remember the names of the people involved, but there was somebody who pulled a gun in the House of Representatives in the abolition debates. And he actually had to be, I don't remember if he shot or not, but he had to be wrestled to the ground. And they called Andrew Jackson's wife horrible, obscene names as part of their standard campaign. So, I mean, campaigns are not particularly dirtier. Everybody acts like Reagan or Karl Rove or Donald Trump invented dirty politics. I mean, there's what was it? Mama, where's your pa? He's gone to the White House, ha, ha, ha. That was 1876 or 1880 or something. And you want to talk about dirty politics? Charles II says hello, and there's I think politics has, and also, I mean, I lived in Indian country, in places where there are still large Indian populations, and their politics can be really nasty too. Sure. I think the politics is inherently nasty, and because it's based on power, that's part of the problem too, is that if politics were simply rational decision making, it might be a lot of fun to actually talk about all this, but it's not. It's really about power, and it's about the ins versus the outs, and then the ins get out, or the outs get in, and then they're the new ins, and then and it's really about, what is the line? Politics is about gaining and maintaining power through whatever means possible, including the most vile necessary, or something. It's, and I know this is a small thing, but it really offended me when I learned many years ago that in the Kennedy-Nixon debates, they turned up the thermostat because Nixon had a thyroid condition that if it got hot, it would make him sweat, and that would make him look creepy. And I recognize he was creepy, but that does not the fact that that's just, I mean, that has nothing. Or here's another one. Okay, but yes, having said all that, politics is decreasing. We can talk about the society of the spectacle if you want, you know, how and sort of sound bites, and how I read this thing a while ago about some newscaster from the 60s bemoaning the fact that people's spans of attention were only such that they could only do like a 60-second soundbite at that point. At that point, a soundbite was 60 seconds. Are you kidding? I wish we could do that. Nowadays, it's all just based on these brief slogans. And then we go back to 1858. The Lincoln-Douglas debates would go on for hours, and they would have classic literary references speaking to illiterate farmers who understood the references to Greek mythology. And I saw this very interesting discussion, or not discussion, but a chart of the grade level reading requirement to understand, or at which various presidential speeches were written. And it went exactly like you'd think, that basically it goes, you know, from 1800 to now. And then I say that and everybody's like, oh, it's Donald Trump. No, this has been going on for, you know, a long time. And then one more thing I want to say about politics, and I know I'm just sort of ranting here, but so for me, two big moments in my political life. In 1980, I was 19 and I voted for Reagan. Sorry, because he said he was going to balance the budget. I was young and stupid, and he said he was going to balance the budget, and everybody said that was a good thing. And then he gets in, and there is no more talk of balancing the budget. He runs the biggest deficits ever. And here's the point, is there was no accountability. And so I know this makes me sound really naive, but maybe that's because we were naive. I mean, I was personally naive, but also people were naive back then a little bit, in that I got slapped in the face with the fact that politicians lie and there's absolutely no accountability. So I got it. Okay, now let's fast forward to 1992. And George Bush the first says that he is going to weaken the Endangered Species Act. Right. I hate it. That's terrible. Awful, awful, awful. Bill Clinton says, oh, no, the Endangered Species Act is great. We're not going to weaken it. And then he gets in, and instead of legislatively weakening it, he messes with Fish and Wildlife budget and changes their attitude such that prior to 92, environmentalists could kind of count on Fish and Wildlife to be our friends. And post 92, you got to sue them to do anything. And they're no longer environmentalist friends. Individually, many of them, but as an organization, they're not. And that Clinton helped to do that. And so what I realized really is Republicans and Democrats, like I said, it's political theater, and or switching metaphors, that's good cop, bad cop, where the Republicans are the bad cops who just say, okay, yeah, we're going to beat the crap out of you. And then the Democrats, and this is a direct line from Bill Clinton, they're going to feel your pain as they, you know, remember how he said with NAFTA, I feel your pain. Yeah. Like, so they're going to be nice about it and just smile. And I'm so sorry, but it's the way it's got to be. But you're still going down. They're both, neither one's on your side.
That is true. That is true.
And it's functional. It's the whole system is set up. I mean, I don't know if now is the time to get into Mumford's Magnificent Bride, because the whole system is set up that we put up with all this crap because we have access to ice cream 24/7. We have access to all of these. We have access to these computers. Once this is over, I can go watch Monday Night Football. And then after that, I can watch, there's like 40 college basketball games on tonight.
Yep.
And if I don't want to do that, I can stream Netflix or BBC. And then I can do that all while eating ice cream and chocolate. And the point is that we get these tremendous luxuries. And in exchange for
A living planet.
well, in exchange for a living planet, and in terms of the political system, in exchange for submission to a system. Here's one more thing I want to say, and then I'll finally shut up. Which is that when I used to do talks, 2000 to 2010, sometimes the audience might be 500 people. There were thousands of people total, tens of thousands of people total through those 10 years. And one of the questions I used to ask is, does the government take better care of human beings or corporations? Everybody would laugh at me. And nobody, not a single person out of those, let's call it 10,000, not a single person ever raised their hand and said it takes better care of human beings. And my point is not that the government takes better care of corporations and human beings. We all know that. The point is, everybody knows it. If you went to Walmart, if you went to, what's the opposite of Walmart? The Met,
Fifth Avenue.
Saks Fifth Avenue. If you went to any place, you could ask people, do you believe the government takes better care of corporations or human beings? Everybody would laugh at you. And I mean, everybody knows that the government does not take care, forget nature, it doesn't even take care of human beings.
Right.
And we all know it. And the reason we put up with it, because we got access to, it's like, what's his face? Kansas, Polly, the biannual, not the annuals, West Jackson.
Well, okay.
Yeah,
what we're talking about. Sorry.
Like 25 years ago, West Jackson said to a group of people that I was one of, the only thing that's keeping the United States from a revolution is Walmart with its cheap plastic crap for everybody. And I mean, there is that. We get that in exchange for not having a democracy. And if we want to talk about Dunbar's number, we can do that too. But that's a whole other topic. Briefly, Dunbar's number is you can't have direct participatory governance with any group of people over 120.
Right.
Beyond that, you have to have some sort of representation. And beyond that, direct relationships start falling apart.
There's too many relationships going on.
And we simply can't keep them in our head. So beyond that, we start getting into, it's easier to have authoritarian regimes over 120. A smaller, you can still have a small authoritarian regime. Look at any abusive family. But it's easier to have a democracy or an egalitarian system that's smaller. But that's a whole other topic too. Anyway, the big thing I wanted to mention is that we're bought off, and that's why we participate. Because even the poorest people in the United States, for the most part, still have luxuries that are better than what Charlemagne had.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I listened to an economist recently talk about, and he was definitely not a fan of capitalism, but he's like, what are we going to do? If you have the choice to live in a small hut with air conditioning or a giant, English castle in the 1600s, I'll take the small hut with air conditioning any day. Okay, that kind of thing. Like, I mean, they might have been loaded back then, but they didn't have the cool stuff we have now, the cool stuff. Yeah, for sure. And as far as Dunbar's numbers go, at least the size of populations, I know when I was studying system science, one of the things that kind of bounced around the campus a bit was this idea that a sufficiently complex system tends to be more efficient when it's decentralized, because there's just too many variables and too many constantly changes in configuration of said variables for a central authority to really commandeer efficiently the whole thing. And that whenever you bring up Dunbar's number, that reminds me of that.
So you just described a healthy functioning ecosystem or natural community.
Okay.
Because it's highly complex and also extremely decentralized.
Right. No, that's another thing too, is that's how nature works. And nature also, I mean, there's this notion that nature has an access to an infinite amount of power where people don't, but I mean, that gets a bit metaphysical. Oh, speaking of, real quick, I just want to say this for anybody who cares. The coolest book I ever read on the rights of nature It's extremely philosophical. So the jargon might not be wholly accessible, but if you grab a dictionary, you should be fine. It's Leibniz and the environment. I forget the name, and Leibniz was a very famous philosopher, gave us calculus, binary system, all sorts of cool stuff. And it talks about just like basically from the ultimate of reality down to the last microbe, everything is necessary and everything is important. And it's a fabulous, fabulous book, Leibniz and the Environment. Okay, that's it. I'm done. Let's move on to Will. How are you?
Still doing good.
Good. I want to hear more about we kind of covered the whole political system is sucks, but we got to do it anyway, kind of thing. I would like to pick your brain more about like your experience in environmental law. If you want to start with or go or talk about the Native American place you were discussing earlier, that's great. Or you can go wherever you want.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things that I was really thinking about is as we're talking about, you know, politics, and I would think that everybody listening to this, you know, wants to see massive and radical change. And, you know, I often get kind of self-conscious being, you know, you bring a lawyer on and the lawyer wants to talk to you about legal solutions to these problems. And I'm somebody that I think I actually practice law to specifically show people why legal change, if it is even possible, is going to happen way too slow for it to be meaningful. And you know, I think I just want to be really clear, you know, what's happening right now. Like, I know everybody's thinking about politics, you know, and everybody's talking about voting and everything tomorrow. We have to realize that we're living at a time where 100 species are going extinct every single day. Right. We're living at a time where the world, if you don't care about non-humans, which I know most humans don't, the World Health Organization says 12 million people are killed by industrial pollution every year. That's more than the Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust. Every single year that's happening. Okay, so when we're talking about, you know, how fast we need change to happen, I don't think that we have any ethical or moral defense to not be acting as directly as possible right now. And right now, if we're losing 100 species every single day, that means that every day that passes that we haven't stopped that is an absolutely unspeakable tragedy. And we often think about how we're going to get into this future where you know, we're going to stop the worst of climate change if we just make these changes. We're gonna save humanity if we just make these changes. But right now, there's such atrocities happening that I think we have to talk about, again, the most direct things, and we need to figure out how to stop this right now.
Cool.
And law is not going to do that.
No.
Law is you know, I've come up with a definition of law that I think helps to understand what I mean. And, you know, the way I look at law, or my definition of law is nothing more than the justification of the application of force. So everybody can understand this when we're talking about a murder trial. You know, someone is accused of murder. We go through this process where you know, these stories are presented by two sides. The jury decides which is right. And if the jury says that the person is guilty, the judge tells the police that it's okay for you to apprehend this person. It's okay for you to kill them in some states. It's okay for you to imprison them. Okay, it's the same thing when we're talking about environmental law. So in the Thacker Pass campaign that Max and I are involved in, the law, I don't want to get into too specifics of the law, but there's a law called the 1872 General Mining Law, which says that on federal public lands, the highest and best use of the land is mining. So whenever a mining corporation stakes a claim to federal public land, the government has to give them permits. The law says that they have to give them permits. So the law provides a justification to the corporation to apply force to Thacker Pass and destroy Thacker Pass. Now, when we're practicing environmental law, what we're trying to do is get a judge to order a corporation to stop doing something, or order the government to stop doing something. And if say a government employee refuses to obey a court's order, what's going to happen? Well, that government employee is going to be held in contempt, and the judge can order armed men and women to go apprehend that government employee. Or if a judge orders a dam to be removed, for example, what's going to happen is the judge is going to order government employees to go and remove that dam. That can take a long time, and we already know how stacked that playing field is against us. So my point as a lawyer, the thing that I always want to talk about is, why do we have to go in and ask a judge if it's okay to defend the natural world? Why is it okay? Why do we have to engage in these tactics where we know we're probably going to lose, just so that we can get a judge to give us the power of the cops to stop a mine or to shut down some destructive process? If we already know that all these horribly atrocious things are happening, and we do have our own ability to apply force, why are we even stepping into courts? Why are we even trying to use law? We already know that we're in the right. Why don't we use force ourselves to stop these projects? And why do we not have serious conversations about when is it justifiable? If the political system is ensuring the destruction of the planet, then why not figure out how to use the force that the political system is already using to protect places and people? And that's why I hate being a lawyer in these conversations, because people expect me to talk about, like I mentioned that law earlier, the National Historic Preservation Act, and what's legal and what's not legal, the General Mining Law of 1872, and what's legal and what's not legal. But I'm a lawyer. I'm saying, don't use lawyers if you don't have to. And in so many situations, if we were just brave enough, we wouldn't have to use lawyers.
That is what you're saying right now, Will, is exactly why I wanted you on the show, because I already knew that you had that sort of disposition. And I was just hoping that we would eventually get to this point. Starting off with just the futility of politics or legal systems making the right changes soon enough is damn near a logical absurdity. Not technically, but it's extremely unlikely. And yet we are morally obligated to right the wrongs that other people have committed. In fact, one of the mottos I had on my radio show, I had two that I said over and over again. One was, nobody owns nature, because the whole notion that that's our mountain range doesn't make any sense. Secondly, was morality always trumps the law. It is the triumph of the Nuremberg trials that there is such a thing as natural law, also known as morality or moral standards or moral reasoning. And even if your government tells you to do something, if it's morally reprehensible or impermissible, you shouldn't do it. You are, by definition, a person is a moral agent. You have the ability to reason for yourself, to come to the conclusions between truth and falsity, right, wrong, good, bad, all that. That's what reason does. And we can talk about postmodernism later if you want. I think we're all on the same board there. It's so fucking stupid. Anyway, it just drives me nuts. Yeah, and I think that you're right. Just because something legal doesn't mean moral, and illegal doesn't mean immoral. Okay, remember that it was illegal for Rosa Parks to sit at the front of the bus. It was literally illegal. Okay, being a runaway slave was illegal. That's how policing started in this country, by the way, was to find runaway slaves. Not a very noble beginning. And a lot of this reminds me of just policing in America and the power they have over us. Like, we have to obey them. You either sit on the ground because I told you to, or I get to kick the shit out of you. What the fuck is that? That's ridiculous. And then I get to shackle you in chains and throw you in a cage. Excuse me? Okay, sorry. That's my little rant there. All right, go ahead. Well, did you want to jump in? I'm sorry. I'm trying to give equal time here. Or, Will, if you want to keep going. Max, I meant to say Max. I'm sorry. But, Will, if you want to keep going, whatever you want to do.
You can go for it, Max.
Max, you got it.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I think this is a really important discussion, and I think a lot of it comes down to these sort of flawed ideas about how society changes, about what the nature of power is, about how these issues have played out historically. And I think a lot of it comes down to the whole clash between idealism and materialism. And, Liera is the person who's really educated me on this, so maybe she's the one who should speak to it. I think that, well, I think the short version, as spoken by a true amateur myself, is that, a lot of people have this sense, this idea that it's ideas themselves that shape society fundamentally, right? That your ideas about how a society should develop are what determine the laws, for example, in this case, the structure of society, the economy, culture, and so on. And that leads to certain outcomes for people, for the natural world, for justice, and so on. Whereas a materialist analysis sort of flips some of that on its head. It says that it is actually the material circumstances that we live in. It's the reality of the situation that we live in that determines our ideology. Our ideas, in many cases, emerge from the environment that we live in, that we grow up in, that we're surrounded by. And I think we can see this play out in our movements so often. I mean, you mentioned Rosa Parks, right? And the civil rights movement is this situation where you have a relatively small group of people, a few percent of the population at most, actively participating in a movement that's widely perceived as quite radical and doesn't have a lot of mainstream support, especially in the early days, and changes the society, ends up changing a lot of the laws and the societal norms by going out ahead of the law, by breaking the law, and so on. So you can see that sort of the societal ideas and the structure of law and the structure of society lagged far behind what actually needed to happen for justice and morality to prevail, and people had to actively push that forward in contradiction to the established law. And I also just want to say, I'm sorry if I keep glancing off to the side here. There's a box right next to me that has a lizard in it, because I went on a walk this morning, and there's a 5-gallon bucket sitting outside, and it got filled up with rain. And I looked in and I thought, oh no, a lizard fell in there and drowned. There's a dead lizard. So I tipped over the bucket, to drain the water out so it wouldn't happen again. And my partner looks at it and she says, I think it's still moving. And just, this was after like looking really closely at it for 30 seconds. It twitched. She twitched once. And so we picked her up and brought her in, and she's been sleeping and recovering all day. I think she's going to make it, but we got the heater right underneath her, and she's in a little box here. So if I'm distracted, sorry. I've got a patient on life support here next to me.
That's okay. Yeah. Not a problem at all.
Oh, and I got to tell you one really cool thing.
Okay.
So she's a Western fence lizard. And what I learned today about Western fence lizards is that ticks will feed on them, including ticks who carry Lyme disease. But when the ticks feed on the Western fence lizard, their blood contains some sort of toxin that kills Lyme disease. So the human rate of Lyme disease, the incidence of Lyme disease, is actually significantly lower in areas where there are Western fence lizards.
Oh, wow.
So she's been taking care of us and keeping us safe for a while. So it's the least we can do.
So do you have is your camera mobile, or is it stuck on your computer? Don't move the lizard.
Let me see.
Don't disturb our patient, but if we can see.
Let me see if I can show you here.
Oh, cool.
She's in the corner right there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Aww,
beautiful.
hi, lizard.
Yeah. She's just sleeping. She's perked up a little. She's perked up a lot from this morning. She was comatose and, just barely breathing this morning, but she's pretty exhausted from the experience.
You could put a hot rock in there for her too.
We've got a space heater right underneath the box. So
yeah, they like a hot rock though.
Yeah.
They can curl up on it if they need to. They can get really nice and warm that way because they're reptiles,
Yeah.
Just an idea, but you can just put a rock in the toaster oven and heat it up, and then just put it in the box, and she'll curl up on it if she wants it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good idea.
All right. All right, we're just kind of going around like that. What's that game with the squares and all the actors and stuff? So we'll back up to Derek and Liera over here. Anything you'd like to mention concerning what was said previous? Or if you want to start something new, whatever you want to do.
Well, just one short comment about postmodernism, which postmodernism is the idea. Postmodernism starts with a really brilliant question. Postmodernism makes me believe that humans are not sentient, because it starts with a really great question, which is, when there are a lot of stories about some incident, how do you tell what's real? So we have a bazillion stories about the American Civil War. So how do we know what's real? We hear that Christopher Columbus is a slaver. We also hear that he's a hero. And how do you tell what story is true? And every parent who has ever dealt with two children has encountered this. There's a scream in the other room, and then little Jenny says that little Billy did it, and little Billy says little Jenny did it, and the parent has to figure out what really happened, who actually broke the lamp. And I mean, this is what law is about, at least on some level. It's like the defense has one story, the prosecution has another, and what really happened. So it starts with the question of, how do you determine what really happened? And it answered it the stupidest possible way, which is, nothing happened. That postmodernism actually answers by saying there are only stories, no reality. And the point I wanted to make, and we could go on about that if you want, but the point I really wanted to make about that is, not even postmodernists believe this. Because if you take them to the edge of a cliff and you say, step off and let's see what happens, they won't do it. And even they know that gravity is real.
Right.
And once you understand that gravity is real, you can build up your entire system of understanding and belief from there. Right. The problem is that this culture, and we can go into this if you want or not, I don't care, but this culture has always preferred what it believes over what is real. And so what's real is the economy. What's real is our system of law. And that always trumps, and I don't mean that as a joke about Trump, that's just, that always trumps what is physically real. And you can see this manifested on every level. One of the ways that it manifests, it just pisses me off and has forever, is every time there is an article about some species going extinct, the journalist has to talk about how the extinction of that creature will affect the economy. And that's always the most important. Which, by the way, is one of the reasons that saving nature for humans' sake is a losing argument, because we can't predict. First off, that means that we can discount any species that we don't have economic benefit for, that we don't perceive as having any benefit from. And second, that presumes we can actually know what those benefits are. And I love the line. I used to think it was David Ehrenfeld who said it, but it was actually some ecologist from the 50s, whose name I don't remember. The nature's not only more complex than we think, it's more complex than we're capable of thinking.
Right. Oh,
and
that's
so
awesome. Yeah.
Any notion of trying to protect nature strictly for human use. Another part of the problem is that one of the reasons we're killing the planet is because we're incredibly narcissistic, and we believe that we're the only ones who matter. And I don't think it's helpful to say, well, we need to protect the planet. We narcissists need to protect the planet because it's good for us, because that just reinforces the narcissism. That's like if you have a neighborhood, and you have one family in the neighborhood that subsists by and gets rich by stealing from everybody else in the neighborhood. That's like telling them, you should probably slow down on your theft a little bit, because your theft isn't sustainable. You need to allow them to build up a little bit more in their bank accounts before you take it all. It doesn't, like in an abusive relationship. And that's another part of the problem, is that it's also a fundamental lie, because what we're getting is all of these luxuries, the magnificent bribe I talked about a minute ago. And all of the products that we get are made by converting living species and living biomes and living beings into products. Those products came from somewhere. And it's simply a lie, and everybody knows it's a lie, to say it will benefit you to stop using those products. The reason we use those products is because it benefits us. We need to, as you said, go back to a form of morality. And I don't know, that's just a little rant. You can take that or go anywhere else different you want.
There's nothing in my head right now that is in any way connected to what you just said.
Well, that's okay, because you can go disconnected. I don't care.
Well, I mean, what you're talking about is the argument from self-interest versus the argument from justice, ultimately. And the argument from self-interest is, like, I mean, you already said it. It's we're never going to get back to the kind of ethical care that we need for the planet, and our understanding that we are actually part of it and not dominators of it. That's never going to come from that. And so that argument from self-interest just never works for me. And I don't know why it works for anybody, honestly. So it really does need to be something.
Oh, it's like, I mean, it's in my self-interest to protect the environment, that kind of thing.
Yeah, or that, well, humans, we have to do it for humans.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And it's like, we need to save the rain. This was the big one. You have to save the rainforest because there might be some compound in some tree nut somewhere that could be the cure for cancer.
Right.
It's never, these trees have a right to exist.
Right.
This biome has a right to exist. It's a self-willed being. It's been there for millions of years. We should have reverence for it. But how could it even cross your mind that you want to kill all the trees? Like, that should just be a sociopathic concept. And anybody who could even think of something so horrifying, we should shun forever. And it doesn't work. So who cares whether there's some, like, that's so beyond why this matters. Like, that there might be something that works for humans inside the rainforest rather than, no, these are magnificent beings who have every right to be here. The concept that we could actually destroy them all is what should horrify us just into our bones, and not because of how it affects us, but because they have a right to be here. So anyway, that's all I got.
Well, you should probably know, by the way, that the only reason that I haven't killed you in your sleep is that there might be a chance that someday there could be something in your blood that could cure Crohn's disease. I mean, it's just, when we put it in those terms, it's just completely absurd.
It is. You're right.
But when we talk about it in terms of non-humans, then this is actually mainstream discourse.
Right.
But it's incredibly sociopathological.
Yes, it's extremely sociopathological.
Which doesn't alter the fact that that's another thing that pisses me off, is that I get, not infrequently, accused of hating humans. And one of the reasons this bothers me is that I'm actually the one who would prefer that the humans who come after still have a planet they can live on, as opposed to the hellscape that is being created by the dominant culture. That it seems to me, so I completely disagree with that sort of narcissistic perspective, but at the same time, I also recognize that long-term anthropocentrism really ends up biocentrism, because without a living planet, you don't have anything.
Yeah.
And I don't understand the accusations of, oh gosh, Derek hates humans, when they talk blithely about, well, let's just keep consuming right now. Never mind the fact that in the next sentence they say humans might go extinct in 2 generations. I mean, the New York Times has talked about humans going extinct by 2100, and yet we're the ones who are trying to stop the destruction that will lead to that.
Right.
It's just, well, and my problem with all this is that I'm presuming that any of this is rational, which of course it is not. And that's a real big problem, is the belief that the problems we face are fundamentally rational and therefore amenable to rational solution. Because I wish with every cell in my body that it would be really fun. The engineer in me and the physicist in me thinks it would be really fun to if we were addressing the problems head on, it would be really fun to try to figure out how we can reduce population in a non-draconian fashion, how we can throttle down. What are the choices that we make to throttle down the overblown technology in a way that's the best for nature and the best for sort of humans for human rights that's what you said, right? Yeah, for human rights is what Lear said. Or like to make a list and say which dam comes out first and to go through. But that's not what's happening. Instead, we keep leaning into this destructive behavior and going the completely wrong direction. And really, I guess also just to put another metaphor on all this or another analogy, I think that really all the, and let me know if I'm putting words in your mouth, Lear, Max, and Will. But we're driving 100 miles an hour at a cliff or over a cliff or into a brick wall or whatever you want to say, and all of us, we four, are simply saying, you might consider taking your foot off the gas and you might consider hitting the brake a little bit. I don't know. Is that a reasonably accurate description of what we're attempting to do? I mean, the whole thing's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, we're actually that everybody is like, we have to lean into more economic growth is what's going to solve the problems caused by economic growth. More technology is going to solve the problems caused by technology.
Electric cars. We got to vote on that in California.
I just read a thing yesterday.
You did?
Yesterday.
It was so depressing.
I read an article yesterday that said that electric cars, the new plan, of course, there are problems still to be solved with this, but electric cars are going to form a significant amount of grid scale storage of electricity. So you charge up your car, and then when your car is sitting there on the curb, that is a form of energy storage, because somehow the grid will be able to, they have to figure out how to do this. The grid will be able to suck the energy back from your car into the grid when necessary.
Okay.
That's just stupid.
Of course, it's just stupid. It's only people living these incredibly destructive, high energy industrial lifestyles that need electricity. I mean, this is just the thing that nobody wants to say out loud. And
right.
This is why there's no hope. It's because we're not allowed to state the basic facts of the situation out loud.
Right.
But there's only been industrial scale electricity for 120 years.
Not even.
Humans.
I mean, just not. I mean, barely.
100 years.
Yeah.
80 years.
I mean, just a tiny little slice of us ever going to get to experience this.
It cracks me up that we are working so hard. We got this great victory when they reduce one pesticide use by 1% on some place somewhere. And it's like, you do realize that prior to 1945,
none of these existed.
Every farm on the planet was organic.
Yeah.
You do realize that, right? And it's like,
yes.
So you're really happy when
we just the tiniest little bit we've
victory.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of these pesticides and fertilizers, synthetic ones, came after World War II from like chemical warfare.
Yeah,
literally.
That's what it is.
It's unbelievable. So now there's war on. I actually posted a quote by you, Derek, from something I on Facebook, and I got a lot of positive responses. And so I'm not going to remember the exact quote now, but it was something like, "There's a war being waged on the natural world, and wars don't end by merely asking." I thought that was very profound. And so let's take that and go. Let's end the show because we're a little bit over, which is okay. It's fine. With Will, when you were saying that force other than politics, could you expand on that a bit?
Sure. I'm talking about, capital F fighting back.
Okay.
I mean, if we're going to take this notion seriously that the natural world is full of our kin, then when you walk outside, you are literally seeing your mother being beaten in the street, and you see it every day. Now, if I walked outside, I'm at my parents' house, my mom's upstairs. If I walked outside and saw my mother being beaten in the street, I would not stop and say, I could write a brilliant lawsuit that could stop that person.
Let me call my legislator. Yeah.
Exactly. I'd be like, if I just filled in this box on this voting ballot, I could stop that.
Right.
No, I'd go and make sure it was stopped. And to me, you know, that's what we have to start to ask. Like, if we realize how much is being destroyed, if we truly claim to love the natural world, then we have to understand that our beloved is truly under assault, and we have to stop it as soon as possible. And when we start to think of it in that way, and we realize that that assault is a physical thing, that's something happening out there in the real world, then solutions start to appear. You know, and maybe I'll steal Derek's line here, but if aliens came down to planet Earth and were systematically cutting down our forests, polluting our water, um, driving 100 species extinct every single day, I think we'd figure out how to stop them. But for some reason, we can't figure it out when it's other humans doing it. So I don't know. My big thing, or I guess my last thing that I always say is, you know, so much we think about these problems, and the only question that people ask is what can I do? And what we really need to ask is what needs to be done. And if we figure out what needs to be done, then we can start having the technical conversation about the steps needed to get there. But you know, yes, you can go to the voting ballot and you can post on Facebook how great it was that you voted and everything. But is that really an adequate response to what's going on right now? And I don't think it is. And I just would really like to have more serious conversations with people that are brave enough to consider these things.
They're very cool, very well said, and that's exactly why I wanted to talk to you on the show. We're gonna definitely have to have. I mean, I think this show here makes you officially the most frequented guest on the show. I think this is like the 5th or 6th time I've had you guys on. And even if it's the 5th, the second runner up is at 3, and that's the mayor of Galesburg. So no, I love having you on. I read a lot of your literature. I watch your videos, and it's always a very good conversation, fruitful and insightful talking to you. And to have Will now amongst the mix is very cool. Thank you, Will. Max, any final words? Not final words, but you know.
Yeah, we it's been a good run. We've got work to do, and you know we're not voting tomorrow on ending the fossil fuel industry,
right?
You know, in the next as rapidly as possible. We're not voting on shutting down industrial logging. We're not voting on ending the overfishing of the oceans and, you know, working to clean up and shut down all the nuclear power plants on the planet. We're not voting on the things that actually matter, that are going to make a difference for the living planet and for future generations. They're not on the ballot. They've never been on the ballot.
Right.
And I don't think they're going to be on the ballot ever. I think it's going to be people's movements that do these things. And we've seen those people's movements grow. We've also seen them get increasingly co-opted in different ways. We've talked a lot about Bright Green Lies before on this show.
Yep.
But I think, you know, that's where the hope lies. It's really with people on the ground who are connected with land, who are in love with this planet, who are willing to fight for this planet. Just like Will was saying, like you would fight for a member of your family or somebody who you love. Because this planet is a member of our family. All the other creatures are members of our family. They are our relatives.
Quite literally.
Yeah, very literally. And we need to follow our hearts and take action. You know, I think that I was having a conversation with somebody earlier today, and we were talking about, you know, how at some level it's rational for people to sit on their butts and be very jaded and say nothing's ever going to change. It's just going to get worse and worse. That's very rational at one level. It's very irrational at another level. But, you know, Will and I, when we went up and set up camp at Thacker Pass, it's jumping off a diving board. You know, we didn't know how we were going to win. We didn't know. We still don't know how we're going to win. We don't have everything figured out. We don't have, you know, a grand plan. But, you know, Derek always says the big difference is not between people who do the perfect action and people who do something that's not quite as effective. The real distinction is between people who take action and those who don't.
I think Liger said that.
Yeah, Lear. Derek is signaling.
Yes. Okay, cool. Up to your square, Derek Lier. Do you want
I'll go first on me.
You go ahead.
Well, two things. One is I would vote for big military budgets if they use the navies to sink illegal fishing vessels. Just want to throw that out there. And start with the illegal ones. Anyway, then the other thing I want to say is that the sort of question of, is it rational to not resist? And I think so often of a conversation that was held by members of the German resistance against Hitler after the invasion of D-Day, that they recognized the war's over, and they said, should we risk our lives in order to try to stop this war sooner when the war is really over at this point? And Henning von Tresckow, who's one of the members of the resistance, said, no, the resistance must go forward. And the reason it must go forward, two reasons. One of them is that every day another 10,000 or 11,000 civilians die. So every day we can bring this war to a close sooner is 11,000 civilians we've saved. And it's the same with 100 species go extinct every day. Every day that we can make this whole economic system collapse, every day we can make that happen sooner is one day less destruction. And then the other reason he said that the attempts for the resistance must go on is, he said, because we have to show to the world and to history that there were some decent Germans. And we have to show to the world and to history that there were some who opposed this. And what I try to do with my work is to try to show to bears and pileated woodpeckers and coho salmon and Pacific lampreys that there are some humans who care. And that's not enough to simply show that we care. The next thing is we have to actually, as you say, love is a verb, and we need to put that into action and to do. And I love what Will said about we need to have the conversation, or was it Will or Max who said that we need to first figure out what needs to be done instead of asking what should I do. It's like, for salmon to be saved, 5 things need to happen. And that's industrial logging needs to stop, dams need to be removed, global warming needs to stop, the murder of the oceans need to stop. And did I say industrial fishing already? Industrial fishing needs to stop. And if those things don't happen, salmon will go extinct. So they need to happen. So next step, how do we go? What are the intermediate steps to make each of those happen? And we need to, instead of just praying that something good happens, we need to figure out what needs to happen and then get it done.
Well said. There.
I would say that we have to stop being afraid of reality, because the reality that we're facing is quite grim. The problems themselves are not actually that cognitively challenging. They're just not. It's just that we don't want to give up this way of life. Or even if we are willing as individuals, we're not really willing to say that out loud because of what it will require of us. And we have to be willing to do that at this point, because whatever you love, it is under assault. We're looking at the end of the world. And I understand that nobody else has ever had to face the literal death of every living creature, but that is what's coming if we do nothing. So we've got to do it. We've got to get it done. And so that has to start with doing that. There's that emotional bump people have to get over of just admitting how bad the situation is. So it's like an alcoholic. You just have to admit how bad it is, and then we can work on the solutions, because it's not actually that hard. It's just nobody wants to do it.
I love the medical model for this. The doctor doesn't say, oh, it can't be cancer because that would be too difficult for us to deal with.
Right. They say, look, you have cancer.
And now
These
here's
are your
what we can do.
options. This is
Yeah.
what we can do about it. So we need to do the same thing, and then we need to get to work.
All right, very cool. Very well said. Well, thank you so much. Will Falk, Max Wilbur, Derek Jensen, Lear Keith. I'm your host, David Rich. Deep Green Resistance on the Illinois Green Party series. I will say one thing I think consistent with all this, the final words here, is Utah Phillips. Most of you probably know who that is. Once said, the planet is being destroyed, and the people who are destroying it have addresses. Okay. And on that note, we'll say adieu. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into the Illinois Green Party series. I'm your host, David Rich. Till next time, be good. Be green. Hold on, guys.